Bojo and hello, I'm James and I'll be your host for this season of the Everyday Forum podcast, an original Stratfest at Home podcast showcasing a sampling of the thought-provoking discussions from the Stratford Festival's 2025 Meighen Forum, the festival within the festival designed to enhance and contextualize the performances in the main Stratford Festival season. The following discussion was recorded in front of a live audience in Lazaretus Hall at the Tom Patterson Theatre in Stratford, Ontario, Canada. Enjoy!
Good morning, everyone. It's so terrific to see everybody out on Saturday morning. Thank you for coming. My name is Julie Miles, and I am the Meighen Forum Director. It is a privilege to gather here today on this beautiful territory, which has been the site of human activity, conversations, and storytelling for many thousands of years. We wish to honor the ancestral guardians of this land and its waterways, the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Wendat, and the Attawanderong. Today, many Indigenous peoples continue to call this land home and act as its stewards, and this responsibility extends to all peoples to share and care for this land for generations to come. If I were to fully introduce our guests today, we would be here until sundown, you'd miss your matinee and probably your night shows, so I'm going to keep this very short and sweet. Joining us in the Meighen Forum today are two very distinguished and accomplished people. Professor Stephen Greenblatt is a Pulitzer Prize-winning author who's also regarded as one of the world's most renowned experts on Shakespeare. And their recent book with co-author Adam Phillips, Second Chances, Shakespeare and Freud, considers how Shakespeare was the supreme virtuoso of the second chance and Freud was its supreme interpreter. And as an exclusive to the Stratford Festival, we have pre-signed copies of his book available in our lobby today, so you too have a second chance to purchase the book. I know. Antoni Cimolino is a member of the Order of Canada and is regarded as one of Canada's most respected and accomplished artistic directors. And this year, in his 38th season at the Stratford Festival, he is the director of our fantastic production of The Winter's Tale. So please join me in welcoming to the stage Stephen Greenblatt and Antoni Cimolino.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming.
Good morning.
Good morning, Stephen, and thank you so much for coming back to the festival, to Stratford.
It's a thrill, and to be in this wonderfully beautiful space, which I hadn't seen before.
It's great. Thank you. Yeah, we're very proud of it. I was so lucky last year, as I was preparing to direct The Winter's Tale, somebody went to the trouble of writing this brilliant book. and about second chances. And I found that it gave me a new lens on Shakespeare's life, his comedies, his tragedies, and of course, The Winter's Tale, his late romances. But also, it got me thinking about life and first chances and second chances and what it takes to actually get a chance at a second chance and whether you take it or not. So why did you write this book?
Very good question. I would like to say I wrote the book because I suddenly woke up and I realized, the second chance is the mysterious key that will unlock everything in Shakespeare. But it wasn't quite like that. It was that I began to think about my own life. I'm one of those people who've had the good fortune to have lived a long life, and half of my life was my adult life was teaching in Berkeley, California. Half of my adult life has been teaching on the East Coast of the United States at Harvard. But then more importantly, I have had two families, a second set of children. I made terrible mistakes, shocking as that may seem, and have tried to rectify them. I was musing about the fact that I've been fortunate enough to have a second round at some crucial experiences in life. And then thinking about that, as I almost always do, I try to think about things through Shakespeare, having spent my life doing that. And I began to think precisely about The Winter's Tale. The Winter's Tale being Shakespeare's greatest play about this possibility, the possibility of having a second chance. And then, only then, I thought, it's the key to everything. That Shakespeare all his life had actually, turns out, thought about whether you could ever have another chance, or hold on to what you want to hold on to, or get back something that you've lost. Anyway, it all in that slightly crazy way one gets, where you get a bee in your bonnet. Somehow trying to think hard about The Winter's Tale, everything began to reach out broader and broader, and in Shakespeare's own work, as well as in my own much more modest existence.
You wrote something very beautiful in the book about the late romances being about Shakespeare writing a meditation or an exploration of how to survive disillusionment, which, can happen over the course of a life.
Yes, and seems to have happened in a profound way to him. It actually is, for those of you who have read a lot of Shakespeare or seen a lot of Shakespeare, if you've been fortunate enough to be near here, you know that this is a person who wrote not simply Hamlet and King Lear and so forth, but wrote Troilus and Cressida, Timon of Athens, plays that really go very, very down into a deep
Cynicism.
hole, and a hole from which it doesn't seem possible ever to climb out. And for reasons we don't really understand, he did climb out, it seems. And in the latter part of his life, I want to say toward the end of his life, but he lived, by our standards, a rather curtailed life. He wrote in his old age, meaning in his late 40s. He began to think about what might lie on the other side of despair and disillusionment, how you would get something back. How could you repair something that had been desperately damaged, that you had damaged? What kind of forgiveness was there on the other side? It is actually a remarkable quality in the late works of Shakespeare. We as I say, he might not have thought of them as late, although I think he probably did, because they seem to be associated with a moment in his life in which he began to think about leaving the London theater, about retiring, while there was still actually quite a lot of time, as he imagined it, left to live.
Let's take a step back and maybe talk a little bit about the world of his youth, in which second chances weren't needed, his comedies, in which they're dealt with. What is a first chance?
I mean, the first chance Shakespeare, as you probably know, all of you had a quite early experience of the first chance, that is to say, of having, shall we say, knocked up a older woman from his town, and getting her pregnant, and then finding himself married, quite young, and with nothing, as far as we know, much to do, but with the need now with a family on the way. And I think that Shakespeare thought himself probably a lot at the beginning of his life, and when he's in his late teens and early 20s, about what is there going to be? What am I up to? What am I up to with my parents? What am I up to with Anne Hathaway Shakespeare and with my sweet little daughter, followed by twins, all before he was 21 years old. And I think the first chance is the chance of family and love, first family in your life. And if you're, I suppose, magically lucky, if things just work out in some crazily good way for you, you can hold on to that for a very long time. Your relationship with your mother and father, with your siblings, with your first love. And I think that Shakespeare comedies, as I say, you'll forgive me if this is a little bit of King Charles's head, as they say, of just a slightly obsessive view of everything through the lens of first and second chances. But I think it's actually the case that Shakespeare's comedies are filled with the thought of how it's possible to hold on to your first chance in life. If it seems to be slipping away, how do you get to recover your relationship to your parents? How do you, as in Comedy of Errors, how do you hold on to the love that you've made, that you've experienced early in life? And the magic of the comedies, from Comedy of Errors to Twelfth Night to As You Like It, you fall in love. Rosaline and Orlando fall in love. How is it possible with lots of obstacles to hold on to that? How is it possible for Viola, who's suddenly fallen in love with Orsino, to hold on to that? And then also to get her brother back. And all kinds of things that seem to have slipped away from you, you can recover. And you recover without an enormous amount of brooding. If you're lucky, it involves a tremendous amount of good luck. And the early comedies especially, are full of just things happening by chance, and of trusting that they're going to happen by chance. Shakespeare never quite gives that up, because actually life is full of accidents and chances. But the interesting thing about Shakespeare's wonderful comedies is that they tend not to reward enormous cunning. They tend to reward good luck and an attitude of cheerfulness about life that might take you through rotten moments in which things seem to be slipping away from you.
That's great. So you've touched on the two things needed for a second chance: a chance, some luck, and a desire, an emotional readiness to seize that possibility. So in the comedies, there's a way of dealing with the heartache where you push through and you find some sort of, through chance, some happiness, right? Fortune's fickle wheel. In the tragedies, where we're in a world where fortune may give you the opportunity for a second chance, but your emotional state is such that you don't seize it. You actually hate the idea.
Yes, that's when the whole notion of first and second chance begins to deepen and darken in those tragedies. The tragedies which dangle, starting fairly early, dangle before you, the character, but also before you, the audience, us, the possibility that it might actually be okay, that it might work. I mean, Romeo and Juliet it's an early example in Shakespeare. It's a fairly early tragedy that's absolutely constructed around the idea that, oh, if only this piece and that piece fall into place, it'll be okay. You will get this. Even though they've said early on, Romeo and Juliet have both said things that suggest that there's some darkness around them. There's that possibility that, well, if the message gets through from the friar, if it just is carried to the right person at the right time, it will all work out. And the tragedy is constructed around the terrible, accidental, in this case, fact that it doesn't work out, that the message doesn't get through, that there's an outbreak of COVID.
Yes.
And the friar...
Mercutio happened to say a plague upon both your houses,
Exactly.
and then boom.
Exactly. And as Shakespeare develops the idea of tragedy, he profoundly deepens this thought, which, as I say, is constitutive almost from the beginning, the idea that what you really want when life is difficult is that the dream of recovering something, getting back, having it work out. And then in the great tragedies, the succession of astonishing tragedies from Hamlet and Lear to Othello and to the Scottish play, those tragedies are totally haunted by that possibility right up to the end. They're actually, Shakespeare figures out, how shall I put it, how to torture the audience with that possibility. So that you get things that are actually, Antoni will know far better than I, that are very difficult for a director to figure out how to deal with. Lear holds his dead daughter in his arms and says, hold a mirror up to her lips and see if there's, as actually Leontes also says, see if there's life there. And then he holds a feather up to his daughter's body and says, aha, the feather stirs. She lives. If it be so, it's a chance which doth redeem all sorrows that ever I have felt. So that right at the end of the play, that possibility is lifted that Cordelia's going to survive. And Lear will have a chance to rectify, to make up for the ghastly thing that he's done. And Shakespeare knew perfectly well that his audience, insofar as they knew anything about the story, knew that's how it comes out in the story. That's his source, has Cordelia survive. But he rips it out. He takes away that second chance. And so, I mean, he does this again and again. Look at in some ways, the craziest moment at the end of Othello, when Othello has smothered Desdemona, she's dead, and Emilia comes on, and he has to acknowledge the fact that he's killed his wife. This horrible thing has happened. And then you hear the voice from the bed, and Desdemona's alive.
Right.
I don't know how you do this, unless maybe cutting it as a director.
No, it's great.
Because it's really crazy. She's alive, but only for a minute.
You and I were talking about this the other day, and there are a whole bunch of things in tragedy which make it so that it's really hard to avoid the tragedy. Time. For instance, in Romeo and Juliet, there's no time. There's no time to think. Because if it was time to think or call for a helpline or something, they would do it, right? So time is one of those factors. But as artists, we look for what's called off-ramps. So we look for those moments where, even though we know how the play ends, and we did this in Winter's Tale, in the trial scene, is there a moment that maybe they might actually talk to each other? Is there a moment that there could be forgiveness? Is there a moment where the tragedy is averted? And there's throughout the text, there are moments where, it's going to be okay, it's going to be okay. And that's critical, because no one wants to come see something that's predetermined, right? They can stay home, and then you won't buy tickets. So in these tragedies, he gives you the possibility of something working out and being okay. And yet, somehow or another, especially in the case of like Othello and Lear, they refuse it virulently.
Yes, and it produces a very peculiar effect, an effect on us. I was thinking of it yesterday afternoon, watching the wonderful production of Winter's Tale, how much Shakespeare's playing with one's own desire as an audience member to intervene and say, are you crazy? To say what actually is said on stage by Camillo. Why would you do this to yourself? Is said even by Leontes. Why would I do this to myself if I weren't absolutely certain? And you get characters in the great tragedies, and again toward the end of his life in the romances, who say the things we want to say. Othello is a play that has a performance history of people in the audience wanting to shout out and intervene. No, pick that up. I mean, that you've dropped your handkerchief, to try to get the thing to stop, because it seems like it would be so easy to get it to stop. But actually, The Winter's Tale is fascinating that way precisely because, unlike, let's say, Othello, where there's a evil character, Iago, who's manipulating the events to make them happen, famously in The Winter's Tale, spectacularly and problematically for anyone who tries to direct the play, there is no evil character who's trying to make this happen. And there's no accidental dropping of a handkerchief. There's virtually nothing. In the source that Shakespeare used for The Winter's Tale, as you probably know, Shakespeare almost never made up his own plots, but he always ripped them off from somebody else. In the source that he uses for The Winter's Tale, there's a very odd mention of the fact that the characters have slightly different names, but a mention of the fact that the Polixenes character, the visitor from Bohemia, is actually sometimes going to Hermione's bedroom to say hello, whatever, good morning. There's moments of alarming intimacy that if you were inclined to jealousy as a husband, you might be aroused by. And Shakespeare it's very interesting that Shakespeare drops that. He never goes that way to suggest that there's some clear reason for the arousal of Leontes' jealousy, let alone a wicked character like Iago or like Don John the Bastard and in Much Ado About Nothing, who's actually making this happen. There's nobody who's making it happen. It's somehow happening internally to Leontes.
Shakespeare left Stratford and was in London, at least for a very solid portion of his professional career, perhaps traveled back and forth, but he left his family behind in Stratford. And in the book, you make the point that of the other playwrights of the time, many of them did bring their families to London.
They did. I was actually very surprised to learn this. I learned it from, as I mentioned to Anthony, it's always wonderful when someone else does the donkey work. Someone hunted up in the archives in England and transcribed and printed what are called playhouse wills. That is to say, the wills, last will and testament written by people in the theater world in the late 16th and early 17th century in Shakespeare's time. And it turns out, lo and behold, that almost all of those people, many of whom were, some of whom were from London, but many of whom were provincials like Shakespeare, when they came to London to work in the public theater, which was the only place in England at that time that had that public theater, they brought their families with them. We can tell from the wills where the families are living. And it's very striking that Shakespeare, who had at that point a wife and 3 children back in Stratford, as far as we know, never brought them, even for a visit, as maybe he did, but we don't have a record of it, and certainly not in any sustained way. They're back in Stratford. He didn't abandon them. He sent money to them, as we know, only from the fact that he eventually bought a very beautiful, fancy house for himself and his family in Stratford. So it's not a question of abandonment, but it's not living together, not raising his children. As far as we know, he saw very little of the 3 children, the 2 daughters, and Susanna and Judith and Hamnet, the 3 children he had. We don't even know for sure whether he went back to Stratford in time to bury his 11-year-old boy, Hamnet, when he died. It's a 2-day trip, at the very least, to get from London to Stratford in the period. Shakespeare was a busy person. We don't know. As I was talking to Anthony before, in the play that we all saw, The Winter's Tale, there's that extraordinary moment in which Leontes is told that his son has died. And those words are haunting, and I think must have, I think must have haunted Shakespeare as he wrote them in 1610, thinking back to his son's death. My lord, your son is gone. And Leontes says, is gone? And the character says, is dead. And I think something like this, those words, those terrible, very simple words, monosyllables, must have been spoken at some point to Shakespeare.
And the loss of that boy, Hamnet, which was interchangeable with Hamlet, and after his death, writing Hamlet, this idea of my son, part of myself, part of the future gone, what might have been.
Yeah, and the Winter's Tale has those remarkable lines about of Polixenes about his relationship to his son. He's all when at home, he's all my matter. I mean that my enemy, my friend. Those actually fabulous and very unusually intimate account of what your relationship is with a little boy, your son. And then there's a question that hovers over Winter's Tale, and again, we've seen the play, so we've seen Antony's way of dealing with it. What do you do with the fact that in this play about redemption, this play about the possibility of getting it back, what do we do with the fact that there's one huge piece of it that you don't get back, which is the son who's died? And in fact, Paulina doesn't say the son you've killed, as she says about Leontes' relation to Hermione, but she might as well have said it, because in fact he did in effect kill his son by this insane act of, as we're told, the son has drooped immediately after the accusation and trial of Hermione. So what do you do with that at the end of a play in which everyone is laughing and filled with wonder and thrill? And as you know, Antony's, I think, quite brilliant solution is that last moment when everything seems to be resolved and all the characters go off happily together. They have a meal together, except for Leontes. And as you remember, he looks back and he sees his son in the company of Apollo. Yes?
Time, yeah.
Time.
Yeah.
He sees his son, and that act of throwing a ball, which is your way of capturing that representation as it's represented in the play of the happy relationship between father and child, father and son. The ball is rolled toward him with a bright light in it, and then the light is out by the time it reaches Leontes. I thought that was an extraordinary idea.
Thank you, Stephen. You've ruined the production for anybody who hasn't seen it.
I'm counting on the fact that you've seen it.
Bless you. But let's take another step back, because Shakespeare. So Shakespeare, we know from the sonnets, if the sonnets reflect his personal desires, he had a very full life in London.
Yeah.
And here he is in 1610 writing about the life that he has lived and maybe those things he got wrong. So going back to that, the story that Green, you say something wonderful in the book about Green, who wrote one of those nasty things about Shakespeare in like 1593 about this upstart crow who's and
beautified with our feathers, he says.
So in other words, here's a writer who rips off everything that's good and claims it as his own. And then almost 20 years later, when Green is long dead, he goes and he steals his poem and makes it better.
Yeah. I think Shakespeare actually never quite got over that early, Shakespeare never directly responded to it, but that early attack by Green saying he's upstart crow, beautified with our feathers. In Hamlet, Hamlet writes a poem that uses the word beautified.
Oh, yes, yeah,
And
beautified.
Polonius
Beautified is
reads the letter out and says, well, beautify, that's a terrible word.
Vile phrase.
Yeah, vile word. I think Shakespeare, that was already after Green was dead. Green died young of drinking too much and eating pickled herring. But Shakespeare never got over that insult. And then at this very charged moment in Shakespeare's life, when he is clearly thinking of retiring, he's about 46. He's had this astonishing career. I think he's quite tired. He's been living this life in which he's been writing sometimes 2 plays, even 3 plays a year, traveling probably with his company part of the time, running his company, controlling the box office. I mean, he's an extraordinary figure in the theater. And I think he, for whatever reason, decides, I'm going to go back to the wife I left behind, to the daughters I've never raised, to the memory of the son who's died. And at that point, he goes back and thinks about this popular bestseller, this novella that Green wrote called Pandosto. And this person, Shakespeare, who had been accused of plagiarism, decides, yeah, I'll plagiarize this thing. I'll see what I can do with it. And of course, he makes it astonishing. Now, if the likes of me read Pandosto, and I recommend it to you because it's interesting to see what Shakespeare does with these rather clunky materials. And among other things, what he does with them, there are many interesting things about what he does with Pandosto, but at the end of Green's Pandosto, the Leontes figure, commits suicide. So think about that. He commits suicide because he has come on to the woman he's discovered was his daughter, Perdita.
Yes,
so
that's much more aggressive in that.
Yeah, that's how Shakespeare handled. He sees this story that follows many of the details that you've seen from The Winter's Tale, except this extraordinary end of impulse to incest followed by suicide and guilt, with no return of Hermione. Hermione's dead as a doornail too, is at the end. So no Hermione. This recovery of Perdita that leads to the incest impulse, and then suicide. And then Shakespeare does what he does with it and what he does with it in The Winter's Tale is Second Chance.
So let's talk about that moment. And your point about how Shakespeare departs from source material is always so fascinating, right? That here he is taking something from another writer and making it so personal. Make it so much about himself. It's kind of miraculous writing in that way.
It is. He does something routinely, I think, that is very strange, and he does it also in The Winter's Tale, but less maybe conspicuously. Although I mentioned the fact that already that in the Green source for The Winter's Tale, there is some reason for the Leontes figure to be jealous or to suspect that something must have gone on. But what Shakespeare tends to do with his sources is he reads them, thinks about them, and he thinks hard, what makes this story make sense? What is the actual core that makes sense of these actions? And he identifies it and throws it away. That's the sort of weird thing. I could show you that he does this again and again. In Othello, Iago, the Iago figure in the source story for Othello, is in love with Desdemona. And Desdemona refuses him, in effect. Not only refuses him, but does something worse. She doesn't even notice that he's coming on to her. She's indifferent to him because she's so in love with her husband. And that's why Iago decides to destroy her and Othello. In Hamlet, likewise, the murder is completely open. The brother's murder of his brother. And it's to be expected that the son of the murdered man will try to kill the murderer. That it's, after all, a Scandinavian story. And Shakespeare takes that and throws it away. So he does this again and again. It's a very peculiar act. And what he discovers is that if he does that, he can get down deep in himself, as you've said, and he can get down deep in us. We begin to think, well, why is Hamlet doing this? Why is he pretending he's mad? It makes sense in the origin story. Hamlet pretends he's mad because he's trying to survive long enough to be able to kill his uncle. And the only way he'll survive is if his uncle thinks he's crazy. But it makes no sense for him to do it any longer in Shakespeare's story. So you begin to wonder, what is the internal motive here? What is the psychological motive? And you could say, in a way, that's the extreme, that Winter's Tale is the extreme version of this. That taking out any excuse for Leontes' jealousy pushes the whole story deep, deep down inside some place that we barely have access to in Leontes and in himself. And in a curious way, and I thought this was fantastic in your production, at a tiny moment, it's something that goes on in language, in the implications of language. In your production, I mean, it's in the play, but I felt it for the first time yesterday afternoon in that word "satisfy." Why did Polixenes agree? Leontes asked Camilla, why did Polixenes agree to stay the extra week? Well, to satisfy the request of your wife. Satisfy. Suddenly, that you can see something going on in that word satisfy that is triggering something very frightening inside Leontes.
Yeah, and so Leontes, when obviously we know he's having this moment, but it's all in his head until Camillo, his advisor, comes out. And you can see in the writing that Leontes is testing Camillo. He doesn't want to say too much. He just wants to put out some breadcrumbs and see what Camillo says so that he doesn't prejudice the witness, right? And it's that word that then helps him begin to understand what everybody's talking about and no one will tell him, which is his wife is a hobby horse. In this play, as you said, he's changed the source material. In this case, while Iago is there for Othello, there's nobody doing that for Leontes, and it's a very efficient structure of one scene after another, moving relentlessly towards the destruction of this man's life, the death of his wife, the death of his son. And then when he gets in that beautiful moment that you mentioned, that you cited as the moment he hears his son is dead, something extraordinary happens, which is that Leontes repents, realizes he's wrong, something Lear, Othello never come to.
It's interesting that it precisely doesn't happen when the oracle is read. What he says is the oracle is lying.
Right.
The first thing you would expect, Hermione is innocent, Leontes is a tyrant. You'd expect that it's the god has spoken. The fact that the god has spoken is not stopping him in the slightest.
Yeah, that's true.
Only when he's told that the son is dead that it finally breaks inside him, the madness.
And then his wife?
And then his wife. But he doesn't believe his wife is dead at that point. When he says she's going to revive, precisely that fantasy that haunts the tragedies as well. She's going to start breathing again. She's just fainted.
And he fully games out that reality, right? I'll make up with Camillo. I'll invite back Polixenes. I'll be good to my wife, I promise. If you and then he gets more bad news.
Yeah. I mean, if it is bad news, so they say one thing that hovers over the play and that is not resolved. I thought myself you tilted slightly in one direction, but you couldn't. I wasn't sure. Is whether Hermione really is dead and has come back miraculously to life, or she's just unbelievably angry at 16 years angry at Leontes, and with good reason, and is just spending her life out in the guest house. And
how did you think I tilted?
I felt that Paulina was going out and bringing 3 square meals a day.
Okay.
To the, I didn't feel that she was actually in the tomb that he was visiting every day. But I mean, you don't give. There's no very. I don't. Maybe you didn't even feel that. I mean, I just thought was maybe tilted.
It's interesting you're saying this because there's some things like Shakespeare's mystery is part of his power. You don't know. It's like life, right? Do you really know what the person next to you right now thinks of you?
Oh, I hope so. I hope you know in some cases.
I mean, really?
If it's your partner.
We don't know. And so there's something limiting about stating things categorically, about revealing motives. Actors often hold on to their secrets. They don't want people to know. And so opening up the discussion, Stephen, with Sarah, who played Hermione, and with Iana, who played Paulina, about, what did you have in those meals? And what did you, and it was not a fertile ground at all, because in a way, they both wanted to preserve the enigma of what might have happened or not happened in that period of time. So we get to end of Act 3, and he's lost his wife, he thinks. He's lost his son. He's lost his friends, his advisors, and he's going to try to repent. And then we go away.
I mean, it is, how should we say, maybe not a perfect, but as close to a perfect Shakespearean tragedy as you're going to get.
Those first 3 acts.
Yeah, the first 3 acts are just a tragedy. And in fact, and the will to repent is, after all, something that hovers over Othello, that even Shakespeare plays with the idea of in Hamlet, when Claudius goes into the closet to think, can I repent? But the fact that you can't repent is also thought through in Hamlet. So one of the odd and remarkable things about The Winter's Tale is that it's a quite coherent tragedy with increasing intensity as you build up toward that trial scene, which I thought, by the way, was tremendous in the production that I saw yesterday. The terrifying nature of the trial scene, the heroic dignity of Hermione, in which she says, everything that I will say, I'll say I'm innocent, but you won't believe that I'm innocent. I mean, because you have no evidence against me, and I can't bring evidence for me. You just have to believe that I'm completely innocent. It's a terrifying story. And then it ends in disaster. The disaster also that he sent the baby out to be abandoned.
Lest we forget. Yeah. Which is crueler. I mean, first he wants her burned, but then he settles with sending her out to die without water, nourishment, and have her eyes pecked out by crows. So it makes Othello look pretty good. And so we end that chapter. And, I keep saying, thank God the dramaturgs did not exist when Shakespeare was writing, because he would have never written this, right? Because then he goes, now it's time for comedy. Now we're going to go to Bohemia, which he flips from the source material, so that which is one of the reasons why, the shores of Bohemia, which does not have shores, because in the original source material, it was Sicily that was where all the pastoral stuff was happening, and Bohemia was the area of jealousy. Most of his tragedies, most of his studies of jealousy are set in Italy, and I don't know why he does that, Stephen. I have to have a talk with him. So he does this thing. Suddenly we have time saying 16 years has passed. Why 16 years? And then we go into this where they're talking about flowers and another world.
So why do you think that the break in the play that's marked the break that's marked by an intermission when you're now, it's not likely that Shakespeare's audiences had intermissions, but we have them. And why do you think the break comes not at the moment in which the end of the tragedy and then you begin with the comic thing, but instead you suddenly move to Bohemia before the lights come up and the audience goes out? It's an odd and interesting choice. I think it's ultimately built into the play, but into Shakespeare's choice.
Yeah.
But why?
I'm not clear on the question, sorry, because my mind was
you have a
drifting
play
to something else.
that begins with
Yeah.
a tragedy and then as a comedy.
Yeah.
And the question is, so it breaks in two. It's in the risk of the play is it's a broken black play. Tragic first half, comic second half.
Yeah, but isn't it like thesis, antithesis, synthesis? Isn't it a three-parter?
Tell me what the third part is.
The Act 5. So the way it brings those two worlds together.
So there's enough tragedy in the last moment, the darkness in the last moments.
Yeah.
But well, let's come back to that. But I'm curious as to what happened. You could end with the death of Hermione, end the first half with the death of Hermione. But instead, we have time, and we have Antigonus being eaten by a bear, which is also a hideous, and a shipwreck. The ship is sinking offshore. So you get something that's carried over in this very weird way. I mean, it's actually a very strange gesture.
It's really weird. And the shepherds say, it's a good day, boy. It's a good day, and we'll make, so because they got money.
I mean, it has something to do with the shepherd. I do think the answer has something to do with the old shepherd saying, "Thou hast seen things dying. I've seen something newborn."
Newborn, yeah. The future.
So and that's the pivot.
Yeah.
That's the moment at which suddenly the idea that and in general, I think Shakespeare is not an evolutionary biologist. But I think he's fascinated by that aspect of all of our lives.
And he talks about
something will be newborn.
And something newborn, blossom, lie thou there. And yet he goes to pains saying the deserts of Bohemia. So they are planting a flower in a desert.
Oh yeah, I didn't
right?
That. Yeah.
And then we go to Bohemia and there's like sheep shearing and it's all fecund and there's flowers everywhere. But we started with the deserts of Bohemia.
That's true. I hadn't actually, I should have thought of that because the 19th century Shakespeareans, people have written about Shakespeare forever, as you know, and the 19th century Shakespeareans went crazy over the question of whether there were deserts in Bohemia or not. So that's true that the deserts of Bohemia are a problem.
Yeah. So you're right though. It's not clean. Like Act 3, before the end of Act 3, we suddenly have bears eating people, shipwrecks, deserts, shepherds discovering. So it kind of takes what is kind of a very effective, beautiful, efficient, elegant tragedy, and suddenly at the end it goes wah wah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And that is, and I think that's why. I mean, the short answer. I think that's why the break, as it were, happens not at the end of the tragedy, but in this peculiar change of tone.
Stephen, help us just with the. I'm interested because in The Tempest, at the end of Act 4, Prospero says, "I have everybody under my command. I have everything." And at the beginning of Act 5, Prospero says, I have everybody under my command. I can do anything I want. So it feels to me like, you'll know this in television, right? Where you see the recap of the previous episode at the top of the next episode. And it felt like Shakespeare is doing that. So what do we know about intermissions, intervals? It's important because like we all go, wow, this is such heavy going, a 3-hour play. But maybe they didn't experience these plays. Maybe they experienced them in many breaks.
I don't think they had breaks, mostly because I think they had practice listening to endless sermons.
You make it sound so appealing, Stephen.
And I think that is why the plays exist the way they exist. They were trained to be fantastic listeners. They might not have liked it, but it was part of their upbringing. It wasn't a voluntary act going to church on Sunday. The attendance was kept track of, and you could be fined, as Shakespeare's father was listed to be fined for not attending.
Right.
So you had to go, and the sermons were often extremely long, and people actually became sort of aficionados of sermons. I mean, that there were famous preachers who gave fantastic sermons and so forth and so on. And if you actually read the surviving sermons by the great ones, by John Donne and others from the period, they're endless. You can't believe it. And they're very complicated verbally. You have to pay an unbelievable amount of attention to understand, because the sentences are fabulously long and complicated. And this was not just for a handful of fancy people, but it was for everybody. I mean, a mixed audience. That's the other world. And Shakespeare figures out how to provide entertainment for a mixed audience, for highly educated people, but also for people who have no education whatsoever. And I think it depends upon the fact that everyone in this culture has been trained to listen very, very carefully for long periods of time.
Well, we have much improved that in our age, because now you can sit at home, the television set will blare at you, there'll be surtitles, and you can watch it while doing this. But
I think we are trained to process very complicated visual signals. I think the late 16th century would have been, at least initially, quite mystified by cross-cutting and all the things that we do in film. They would have been surprised and mystified in the way that we're sometimes mystified by what Shakespeare is up to when people say things. Even if you spend a long life, as I have, thinking about Shakespeare, if I actually force myself to think, what does that mean exactly? I have to take a step back and think, I have to work it out.
Yeah, but at the same time, he helps you get the gist of it. He knows how to put spin on the ball very effectively. And he's very filmic, right? Like here he is. Like think about this end of this act. Suddenly we're in Bohemia. Suddenly there's a bear. Suddenly there's, he manages to change and jump cut very effectively.
And then, of course, he does, as you will know, he does something, this is actually not typical for Shakespeare. He does something relatively infrequently, but here spectacularly in Versailles. He introduces a number of new characters, but one spectacular new character, namely Autolycus, the thief, who wins the audience over immediately. And the Autolycus is fabulous in the performance that you have here. He's immediately talking to the audience, and they're applauding him, and they're loving him.
Right. Yeah.
And so, where does that come from? What is this about?
And you know what? The play does not work without Autolycus, because he's the glue that brings everybody together. And
I do think, actually, I think that Shakespeare, this is not hugely important except to the likes of me, but Shakespeare thought, I think, all through his life a lot about what he was doing, who he was, what was the nature of his enterprise. And at various moments, he creates characters who are sort of reflections of what he thinks he's up to, often rather unpleasant characters, like Richard III or Iago, who come up with plots, move people around, create things, make them happen. And then in The Winter's Tale, I think it might be unique in Shakespeare. He comes up, I think, with two characters who, in different ways, reflect what Shakespeare as a playwright must have thought he was like. And they're two very different ideas of who he's like. One is, I'm a thief. I'm a comic thief. I steal sheets, let's say pieces of paper as well as
that's
things
good.
you sleep on. I steal sheets and I use them for my own profit. I'm picking your pocket. That you lean over, I'll give you a big hug, and I'll have your money at the end of it. And I think he thinks of himself, and I'll make it all happen, and you'll love me for it. So one version is Shakespeare as a kind of lower class thief who serves the aristocrats, but who serves them in his own interests. Because Autolycus, of course, was part of the household of Florizel. So that's one image, and the other image one image is I'm a thief, and the other image is I'm a witch. I'm Paulina. I am actually organizing all of this. I am keeping the plot going. I am going to make the reveal at the end. I'm the moral force behind all of the entertainment. So it's an amazing achievement to have these two very different accounts. And I think he must have had them both at that point in his life, both deep in him. I'm a thief and I'm a witch.
That's
both,
gorgeous.
how should we say, illegal in the period, but they're the survivors as well. I should mention, by the way, that this fascinates me, that Paulina says something in the trial scene or building up to the trial scene just before, that if you said it anywhere else in early 17th century England, you would be in exceedingly hot water. You would likely to have your nose slit, your ears cut off, or possibly executed. She says, when he threatens to burn her, Leontes threatens to burn her, she says, it's a heretic that makes the fire, not she that burns in it. Now, this is a world in which the persecution of heresy is still an active process of people being burned.
And that Shakespeare's audience, at least the older ones, would know about Anne Boleyn, right? Anne Boleyn, who was, like Hermione, accused of adultery, of treason, perhaps witchcraft, right? And so they know that while we're watching this play that happens very far away and long time ago, it actually happened in our country just 50 years ago.
Absolutely.
Or 60.
Yeah, it's Shakespeare specialized in staying out of prison. As we already know, he did his whole life. But he did it not by never saying anything risky, but by figuring out how to say unbelievably risky things through his characters indirectly. A dog's obeyed in office. Handy dandy, which is the justice, which is the thief. A heretic, it's a heretic that makes the fire, not she that burns in it, and so forth.
So I'm conscious that we're going to run out of time. Damn it. Then we go to Bohemia, and we find that the poison that Leontes has spread is still there with Polixenes and his son. But the new generation, the 16 years, gives chance for that next generation to be born and to somehow do better than their parents, undo, the sins of the father are corrected by the son in this case. Then we go back to Sicily, and that miraculous statue coming back to life. How familiar would Shakespeare's audience have been with this? Would they have been surprised by that scene?
I mean, in some sense, yes, they would have been surprised. Surprised in a very special sense, because one of the things that was done in the preceding generations, all through the 16th century, was to take statues that moved and one of the things that was done in popular Catholicism before the Reformation, so the whole first half of the 16th century and then going back a long time before then, was to have statues that moved, to have statues of the Virgin that wept, to have crucifixes with movable arms and legs. And one of the spectacular, how should we say, quasi-theatrical events in the real world that was done in the Reformation was to take those statues, turn them around before an audience, show the audience the strings that were in the back that made the arms move or that released the tears from the Virgin's eyes, and then fling them down and burn the statue. So the idea of the moving statue was something that in the quite contested past of England and the struggle between Catholics and Protestants, the moving statue was an absolute, how should we say, no-no, the statue that comes to life. On the other hand, they know the story of Pygmalion, and they know, or at least people who know anything about the classical world. And if you have, there aren't a lot of other moments as far as I know, that someone could remind me of some in the theater in this world in which statues move. But if you have a build-up toward a statue that looks exactly like the person, it's a little like the gun that is introduced in Act 1,
right.
will certainly go off by Act 5. Then maybe you would expect, especially all that talk about the paint isn't dry yet. And it is also probably some kind of internal reference there. One thing you cut, and I understand why you cut it, there's a certain amount of blather in Act 5 of The Winter's Tale about who made the statue.
Yes,
it was made by
Giulio Romano.
Giulio Romano.
Yeah.
And I thought, I mean, it's not in the version that Antoni created, but why did Shakespeare, there was an artist named Giulio Romano, but why did Shakespeare want to introduce to an audience that most of whom would never have heard of Giulio Romano? Why does he want to introduce that name? And I think it's a kind of internal joke. Giulio Romano sounds like Romeo and Juliet. And I think that he's thinking about what he does, which is to make things come alive and move, to take what looks, how should we say, dead on the page and make it and give it lifelikeness.
Yeah.
I think that, and so I think as with many things in The Winter's Tale, he's looking back at a whole career, from the early comedies through the tragedies, and now at this point in his life, nearing when he's thinking of retiring and thinking about what he is and what he's done.
As you know, some people come to this for the first time and they don't know, which is beginner's eyes, magical. But as a person who's seen this play many times and understands the late romances, what do you experience when you see that statue come to life?
I had a weird experience, I have to say, yesterday. I don't have to tell you, I've been around the track a bunch, and I've seen the play, and I knew how it was going to come out, and I started. I don't want to exaggerate, but tears started going down my cheeks yesterday. I thought, what am I? Am I crying? Really? I can't explain it. I found it incredibly moving. And I can't fully even now account for why I found it moving, because I knew it was going to happen. And it was partly that it was very delicately and beautifully done. It was partly a peculiar form of gratitude to the actors for giving me this pleasure. The why I would cry for that is not so clear. I could just laugh and applaud. And it was partly that I got caught up, as I think you do get caught up, in the dream that you could actually have a second chance. You could get something back. It's a very modified version of this. That's one of the things that's brilliant about The Winter's Tale. You don't get it all back. In this case, symbolically and really, you don't get the dead son back. But also, you don't get the relationship, as Shakespeare must have discovered. You don't get whatever he felt when he was 18 with Anne Hathaway up in that cottage. He wasn't going to get back when he was 46, having left them behind in Stratford all those years. Something else was going to happen. But something would happen. Something, at least that was his dream, and that is the dream of the play. there's that amazing moment in the play in which Leontes says, Hermione was not so wrinkled as this. And you realize time has passed. A lot of time has passed. And you can't get that time back. It's not going to come back. But something will. You'll get something. It'll be different. And you'll hope that it will be restorative. The play even here is so intelligent and so deep about that, because Antoni and I were talking about this before we came on stage. Shakespeare never entirely trusted stage directions. He didn't, I think in the texts that we actually have that survive from the period, you can't trust the stage directions. They might not have been written by Shakespeare himself. So when he really wanted something to happen, he tended to write it into the dialogue. And you could also cut the dialogue if you didn't want it to happen, if you were directing it. But so in The Winter's Tale, he clearly wants Hermione, when she comes down, to put her arms around, to touch Leontes. And the touching, of course, is crucial here because it's made much of in the play. She's warm, that he says. If you've ever touched a statue when the guards aren't looking, you'll know they're cold. And so that astonishing feeling that she's warm. But then she puts her arms around Polixenes, I think, is the one who says she's putting...
Yeah, and Camillo, yeah.
And Camillo,
yeah.
She's putting her arms around his neck. So she wants...
She hangs about his neck.
Shakespeare wants that. But at the same time, she never speaks to him for the rest of the play. She speaks to her daughter. And she says, that's why I've kept myself alive. So you don't know. Maybe that's also a little bit accounts for my old man's tears. You don't know what you're going to get at the end, what the life will be like between them after so much has passed. Something will be between them. We hope it's not only going to be bitter. The fact that she's embraced him means that there's been some reconciliation. But it's the next generation that she's kept herself alive for. And this is something I think that Shakespeare thought about a lot, not only at the end of his life, but he might well have thought of it at the end of his life when he went home to two daughters one had married and one was of marriageable age. He's quite interested in what it is to let go of your daughter when she's of marriageable age. That's a subject that I think quasi-obsessed him. But he's fascinated by the fact that in your life, in the life of an adult, there's a key moment at which, if you have a child, there's a key moment at which your child becomes an adult, which here I think means basically sexually active. There's that unusually intense, sexually charged exchange, unusually so, between Florizel and Perdita. Really, if you look at it carefully, it's kind of startling how sexually charged it is. And I think Shakespeare wants that, wants you to have a sense that Perdita is of marriageable and of reproductive age. And the moment, this is the great theme of King Lear as well, the moment at which your youngest daughter becomes of marriageable reproductive age marks a huge watershed in your life as an adult, because it means the next generation is coming.
Yeah, Lear starts with Cordelia's marriage, right?
Exactly. And if you look, there's something called some people know, there's for writers like Shakespeare, Milton and so forth, there's something called a concordance, which is just now it can be done on a computer quite easily, a list of all the words that are used, both in individual plays and in a whole career. And if you look up words that are used multiple times in The Winter's Tale, and much, much more often than in any other play by Shakespeare, it's a word you wouldn't expect and you don't necessarily hear when you watch the play. And the word is issue. Very funny word, issue. And issue is a gesture toward the next generation. It's what comes out of you. It's your child. It means a whole bunch of different things. It's the thing that emerges from you. It's your child or your heirs. It's the result or the end of the plot. And it's used more often in The Winter's Tale than any play by Shakespeare. So he's thinking about that, about what is the issue, and the end of the play, incredibly beautifully, I think, is about, yes, you're having a second chance. Yes, you've got remarried, or you've recovered, in this case, your first wife. Yes, you can try it all over again, but it's really about the next generation.
I hate to stop you. It's a working theater, so we're going to have a matinee here, so we've got to be out of here at 10 minutes to. So now we enter the rapid round of questions in which this audience gets you asked to deeply personal things, and you have to tell us the truth. Here we go. So the topic we didn't get to in Second Chances, Shakespeare and Freud. Will you be signing books after this?
I did before. I have a whole bunch of. I have to run off to catch a plane.
Oh, okay.
But I
There's ones you can buy.
I did.
Thank
sign
you.
a great more of them than we needed. But I hope some of you will.
Thank you, Stu. Can you compare Shakespeare and Freud on what are the key essences of being human?
The answer is
60
yes.
seconds.
Yes. But one, I want to pick up something that Antoni said earlier, that I think obsessed Shakespeare and Freud, both in different ways. And it has to do with why people block their own happiness, which is very much what The Winter's Tale focuses on. Why would it happen? Why would people ruin their lives? And why, when they seem to have the opportunity to rectify it, why don't they rectify it? Why does the solution seem worse than the problem? When Camillo says, "Don't do this, you're wrecking everything," and he can't stop himself. So that is one piece of the answer to this. Shakespeare and Freud were both obsessed with this very peculiar quality in humans. Freud had various terms, some mysterious terms for it, including the death wish, for why people block their own happiness. Wow. Freud thought that he could cure people, at least young Freud thought he could cure people from this. Older Freud thought, well, it's a little more complicated than that.
Good answer. A quick one, too. Montaigne, I thought I'd go to Montaigne next, has much to say about fortune making things happen. What role does she play in Shakespeare, fortune?
A huge role, fortune, in an enormous role in all through Shakespeare's plays, but particularly in the comedies, and then in the romances as well. But in the romances, there's that moment, as you will know in The Tempest, Antoni will know because he's thinking about The Tempest, there's a moment in The Tempest in which it just so happens that a boat carrying all the relevant people is going by the island. But Prospero says, this is it. If I miss this opportunity, it's all over. So there is, on the one hand, fortune, but there's also seizing the moment for fortune. And Shakespeare is interested in both sides of that. The Renaissance loved that figure, the figure of that has a huge forelock, big hunk of hair coming out the front, but completely bald in the back. So if you seize the forelock when it's going by, you can hold on to it. If you've missed that moment, God help you, it's completely bald in the back.
Okay, on The Tempest, here's a question. Is forgiveness or leaving his magic the bigger choice of a second chance for Prospero?
I think it's the case, and it goes back to something you said about why at the end of Act 4, why the beginning of Act 5 seems to begin the same way. They're all in my power. I think it's the case that in the late 16th century and the early 17th century, everyone in the audience here would have known that if a ruler has been hurt violently hurt, mistreated, toppled, almost killed, and so forth, and he has his enemies in his power, you know what's going to happen. And the remarkable event in The Tempest, thanks to Ariel, is that Prospero doesn't do what everyone would have expected the ruler to do, which is basically to eviscerate, castrate, cut in quarters, and so forth and so on, all the stuff they actually did to their enemies. So that act of forgiveness, I think, for them would have been a remarkable, insignificant act. The curious thing about Shakespeare and The Tempest is that that notion in which he forgives his enemies is followed at the end of the play by an even stranger moment in which the actor who plays Prospero, but also really, in effect, represents Shakespeare, turns to you and to us and begs our forgiveness, as if he's done something's wrong, and he needs to be pardoned. And I think that moves in the other direction, as it were, not toward the political act of forgiveness, but towards something in the human capacity to create and to love.
Wow. And they're kind of connected in a way, aren't they? Because leaving whatever sins he created through his work, his magic, renouncing that is also part of his need to be forgiven by God. And I suppose by losing the magic, he then has to go into a future where he has forgiven and is asking to be forgiven, and doing it without guns, doing it without any power at all, other than,
And it must have been extraordinary to feel what Shakespeare must have felt about his power. As I said earlier, there's the Iago version of what it is to have his power, which is terrifying and horrible. But even in the Winter's Tale, I'm a thief, I'm a witch. And to give up your magic, to give up picking people's pockets, and to give up doing whatever witches do, putting them in spells, to give those things up is a big act.
There are really fantastic questions here. My apologies, like really wonderful ones. But I want to ask you one last thing because we've got 1 minute. You're working on a new book. Will you come back next year?
Oh. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Well, no, that's not a closer. We got 2 minutes.
Okay.
I won't press you on that, but tell us about your new book.
My new book is called Dark Renaissance. The subtitle is The Dangerous Times and Fatal Genius of Shakespeare's Greatest Rival. A very long subtitle. It's about Christopher Marlowe. And it's about the reckless, alarming, fascinating life of someone born a few months apart from Shakespeare, same year, 1564, born in a provincial town, from a social background even lower than Shakespeare. Shakespeare's father was a glover, but he was a significant glover, and sometime equivalent mayor of Stratford. In the case of Marlowe's father, was a shoemaker of, how should we say, no distinction, in Canterbury. And Marlowe did what Shakespeare, as far as we know, didn't do ever, which is to make it to university and get a degree. And then he was preparing, in effect, the degree was preparation for the priesthood. Marlowe was the least likely Anglican priest in the world and didn't become one. But when he left Cambridge University, he went to London and he wrote a succession of plays, the two parts of Tamburlaine, Jew of Malta, Edward II, Dr. Faustus, and others, that paved the way for Shakespeare. They're astonishing plays. They're dangerous, transgressive plays. Shakespeare is watching them very carefully and figuring out what he can do with them. And then Marlowe is murdered at the age of 29 in 1593. And what hovers behind that life is something that Marlowe evidently did, though the details are rather unclear, just before he graduated from, or probably 2 years before he graduated from Cambridge, which is that he was recruited for the spy service, so that he made, in effect, a deal with the devil, which is his great theme, of course, in Dr. Faustus. And he probably knew he had only a limited number of years to live. And Shakespeare is watching, responding to. I imagine in my book what a conversation between Shakespeare and Marlowe, who probably worked together on the Henry VI plays. By the way, if Shakespeare had died at the age that Marlowe had died, we'd think, oh, Shakespeare was that interesting guy who wrote Henry VI and also Titus Andronicus. Oh yeah, it hadn't yet happened for Shakespeare when he was 29. But I imagine Shakespeare and Marlowe sitting down together, working together in the writer's room about Henry VI, and Marlowe looking up, Marlowe who was trained as a spy, looking up and saying, oh, what do you think about Queen Elizabeth? Or don't you think that Earl of Southampton is a cute guy? Shakespeare smiling and saying, I have to go. I have an appointment somewhere else. John Aubrey, who was an early 17th century or mid 17th century writer and collected gossip, says that when Shakespeare was invited out for a debauch, he would say, I'm sorry, I can't come, I'm in pain. He had a headache. And I imagine that Shakespeare knew already in his 20s that Marlowe was heading in a terrifying direction, and that Shakespeare could learn what he could learn from Marlowe, and he learned pretty much everything from Marlowe, including theatrical blank verse, iambic pentameter, unrhymed iambic pentameter, but that he wasn't going to go there.
When does the book come out?
September 9th.
Okay, so we can pre-order, but right now, I'm sorry, we have to say goodbye. Thank you so much, Stephen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I love being here. Thank you.
Thank you for listening. Be sure to subscribe to keep up with the lively conversations and original performances on the Stratford Festival streaming service, Stratfest at Home. And for making it this far in the episode, enjoy 1 month for free. Visit stratfestathome.ca and enter code FREEMONTH. It takes you, our listeners, to make this possible. It also takes the support of our dear collaborators. Support for the Meighen Forum is generously provided by Kelly and Michael Meighen and the T.R. Meighen Family Foundation. Original score for the Everyday Forum podcast was provided by Hilary Adams. Production support is provided by the film production and distribution team at the Stratford Festival. That is coordinator Vilma Mancini and director Jenna McGaw. The Meighen Forum team is producing assistant Renata Hansen, associate coordinator James Hyatt, manager Gregory McLaughlin, and director Julie Miles. Special thanks to Mike Duncan, Greg Doherty, and Harper Charlton. Finally, thanks to Artistic Director Antoni Cimolino and Executive Director Anita Gaffney. From here in Stratford, Ontario, on the land of the Neutrals and the Anishinaabe, see you next time. Ba Ma Pi.